Long before Christopher Columbus sailed, Europeans had dreamed of a land of abundance, riches, and ease beyond the western horizon. Once discovery took place, they invented an America of the imagination, projecting onto it their hopes for a better life. Here, many believed, would arise unparalleled opportunities for riches or at least liberation from poverty. Europeans envisioned America as a religious refuge, a society of equals, a source of power and glory. They searched the New World for golden cities and fountains of eternal youth. Some of these dreams would indeed be fulfilled. For many European settlers, America offered a far greater chance to own land and worship as they pleased than existed in Europe, with its highly unequal social order and official churches. Yet the conditions that enabled millions of persons to take control of their destinies were made possible by the debasement of millions of others. The idyllic New World also became the site of many forms of unfree labor, including indentured servitude, forced labor by Indians, and one of the most brutal and unjust systems ever devised by man, plantation slavery. There was a vast human diversity among the peoples thrown into contact with one another in the Atlantic world. Exploration, settlement, and the rapid growth of New World colonies took place in an era of almost constant warfare among European nations, each racked by internal religious, political, and regional conflicts. The empires established by Spain, France, the Netherlands, and Great Britain differed in their economic and political structures, and in their relations with the hemisphere's indigenous inhabitants. Native Americans and Africans consisted of numerous groups with their own languages and cultures. They were as likely to fight one another as to unite against European newcomers. All these peoples were changed by their integration into the new Atlantic economy and by their relationships with one another. The complex interactions of Europeans, American Indians, and Africans would shape American history during the colonial era. On April 26, 1607, 3 small ships carrying colonists from England sailed out of the morning mist at what is now called Cape Henry into the mouth of Chesapeake Bay. After exploring the area for a little over 2 weeks, they chose a site 60 miles inland on the James River for their settlement, hoping to protect themselves from marauding Spanish warships. Here they established Jamestown, named for the King of England, as the capital of the colony of Virginia, named for his predecessor Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. But despite these bows to royal authority, the voyage was sponsored not by the English government, which in 1607 was hard-pressed for funds, but by the Virginia Company, a private business organization whose shareholders included merchants, aristocrats, and members of parliament, and to which the Queen had given her blessing before her death in 1603. When the 3 ships returned home, 104 settlers remained in Virginia. All were men, for the Virginia Company had more interest in searching for gold, and in other ways of exploiting the area's natural resources, than in establishing a functioning society. Nevertheless, Jamestown became the first permanent English settlement in the area that is now the United States. The settlers were the first of tens of thousands of Europeans who crossed the Atlantic during the 17th century to live and work in North America. They led the way for new empires that mobilized labor and economic resources, reshaped societies throughout the Atlantic world, and shifted the balance of power at home from Spain and Portugal to the nations of northwestern Europe. The founding of Jamestown took place at a time of heightened European involvement in North America. Interest in colonization was spurred by national and religious rivalries and the growth of a merchant class eager to invest in overseas expansion and to seize for itself a greater share of world trade. As noted in Chapter 1, it was quickly followed by the founding of Quebec by France in 1608, and Henry Hudson's exploration in 1609 of the river that today bears his name, leading to the founding of the Dutch colony of New Netherland. In 1610, the Spanish established Santa Fe as the capital of New Mexico. More than a century after the voyages of Columbus, the European penetration of North America had finally begun in earnest. It occurred from many directions at once, from east to west at the Atlantic coast, north to south along the St. Lawrence and Mississippi rivers, and south to north in what is now the American Southwest. English North America in the 17th century was a place where entrepreneurs sought to make fortunes, Religious minorities hoped to worship without governmental interference and to create societies based on biblical teachings, and aristocrats dreamed of recreating a vanished world of feudalism. Those who drew up blueprints for settlement expected to reproduce the social structure with which they were familiar, with all its hierarchy and inequality. The lower orders would occupy the same less than fully free status as in England, subject to laws regulating their labor and depriving them of a role in politics. But for ordinary men and women, emigration offered an escape from lives of deprivation and inequality. "No man," wrote John Smith, an early leader of Jamestown, "will go from England to have less freedom in America." The charter of the Virginia Company, granted by James I in 1606, promised that colonists would enjoy all liberties of those residing in our realm of England. The settlers of English America came to enjoy greater rights than colonists of other empires, including the power to choose members of elected assemblies, protections of the common law such as the right to trial by jury, and access to land, the key to economic independence. In some colonies, though by no means all, colonists enjoyed considerably more religious freedom than existed in Europe. Many degrees of freedom coexisted in 17th century North America, from the slave, stripped completely of liberty, to the independent landowner, who enjoyed a full range of rights. During a lifetime, a person might well occupy more than one place on this spectrum. The settlers' success, however, rested on depriving Native Americans of their land, and, in some colonies, on importing large numbers of African slaves as laborers. Freedom and lack of freedom expanded together in 17th century America. Although John Cabot, sailing from England in 1497, had been the first European since the Vikings to encounter the North American continent, English exploration and colonization would wait for many years. As the case of Spain suggests, early empire building was, in large part, an extension of the consolidation of national power in Europe. But during the 16th century, England was a second-rate power racked by internal disunity. Henry VII, who assumed the throne in 1485, had to unify the kingdom after a long period of civil war. His son and successor, Henry VIII, launched the Reformation in England. When the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry severed the nation from the Catholic Church. In its place, he established the Church of England, or Anglican Church, with himself at the head. Decades of religious strife followed. Under Henry's son Edward VI, who became king at the age of 10 in 1547, the regents who governed the country persecuted Catholics. When Edward died in 1553, his half-sister Mary became queen. Mary temporarily restored Catholicism as the state religion and executed a number of Protestants. Her rule was so unpopular that reconciliation with Rome became impossible. Mary's successor, Elizabeth I, who reigned from 1558 to 1603, restored the Anglican ascendancy and executed more than 100 Catholic priests. England's long struggle to conquer and pacify Ireland, which lasted well into the 17th century, absorbed money and energy that might have been directed toward the New World. In subduing Ireland, whose Catholic population was deemed a threat to the stability of Protestant rule in England, the government employed a variety of approaches, including military conquest, the slaughter of civilians, the seizure of land and introduction of English economic practices, and the dispatch of large numbers of settlers. Rather than seeking to absorb the Irish into English society, the English excluded the native population from a territory of settlement known as the Pale, where the colonists created their own social order. Just as the reconquest of Spain from the Moors established patterns that would be repeated in Spanish New World colonization, the methods used in Ireland anticipated policies England would undertake in America. Some 16th century English writers directly compared the allegedly barbaric wild Irish with American Indians like the Indians. The Irish supposedly confused liberty and license. They refused to respect English authority and resisted conversion to English Protestantism. The early English colonies in North America and the West Indies were known as plantations, that is, communities planted from abroad among an alien population. The same term was originally used to describe Protestant settlements in Ireland.